Namaste, Dandavad Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Vishnupad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, the Status Quo, Chapter 26, Text 32. Tamasachcha vikurvanad Bhagavad Virya Choditat Shabdamatram Abhutasman Nabashrotram tu Shabdagam. When egoism in ignorance is agitated by the sex energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the subtle element sound is manifested, and from sound came the ethereal sky and the sense of hearing. Purport. It appears from this verse that all objects of our sense gratification are the products of egoism in ignorance. It is understood from this verse that by agitation of the element of egoism in ignorance, the first thing produced was sound, which is the subtle form of ether. It is stated also in the Vedanta Sutra that sound is the origin of all objects of material possession, and that by sound one can also dissolve this material existence. Anavriti Shabdat means liberation by sound. The entire material manifestation began from sound, and sound can also end material entanglement if it has a particular potency. The particular sound capable of doing this is the transcendental vibration, Hare Krishna. Our entanglement in material affairs has begun from material sound. Now we must purify that sound in spiritual understanding. There is sound in the spiritual world also. If we approach that sound, then our spiritual life begins, and the other requirements for spiritual advancement can be supplied. We have to understand very clearly that sound is the beginning of the creation of all material objects for sense gratification. Similarly, if sound is purified, our spiritual necessities also are produced from sound. Here it is said that the sound from ether became manifested, and then air became manifested from ether. How the ethereal sky comes from sound, how the air comes from sky, and how fire comes from air will be explained later on. Sound is the cause of the sky, and the sky is the cause of Shrotram, the ear. The ear is the first sense for receiving knowledge. One must give oral reception to any knowledge one wants to receive, either material or spiritual. Therefore, Shrotram is very important. The Vedic knowledge is called Shruti. Knowledge has to be received by hearing. By hearing only can we have access to either material or spiritual enjoyment. In the material world, we manufacture many things for our material comfort simply by hearing. They are already there, but just by hearing one can transform them. If we want to build a very high skyscraper, this does not mean that we have to create it. The materials for the skyscraper, wood, metal, earth, etc., are already there, but we make our intimate relationship with those already created material elements by hearing how to utilize them. Modern economic advancement for creation is also a product of hearing. And similarly, one can create a favorable field of spiritual activities by hearing from the right source. Arjuna was a gross materialist in the bodily conception of life and was suffering from the bodily concept very acutely. But simply by hearing, Arjuna became a spiritualized Krishna conscious person. Hearing is very important, and that hearing is produced from the sky. By hearing only can we make proper use of that which already exists. The principle of hearing to properly utilize preconceived materials is applicable to spiritual paraphernalia as well. We must hear from the proper spiritual source. Text 33. Artashrayatvam shabdasya drastorlingatvam eva cha tanmatratvam cha nabhaso lakshanam kavayo vidhu. Persons who are learned and who have true knowledge define sound as that which conveys the idea of an object, indicates the presence of a speaker screened from our view, and constitutes the subtle form of ether. Purport. It is very clear herein that as soon as we speak of hearing, there must be a speaker. Without a speaker, there is no question of hearing. Therefore, the Vedic knowledge, which is known as Shruti, or that which is received by hearing, is also called Aparusha. Aparusha means not spoken by any materially created, not spoken by any person materially created. It is stated in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, Tene Brahma Vrida. The sound of Brahman or Veda was first impregnated into the heart of Brahma, the original learned man, Adi Kavayi. How did he become learned? Whenever there is learning, there must be a speaker in the process of hearing. But Brahma was the first created being. Who spoke to him? Since no one was there, who was the spiritual master to give knowledge? He was the only living creature. Therefore, the Vedic knowledge was imparted within his heart by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated within everyone as Paramatma. Vedic knowledge is understood to be spoken by the Supreme Lord, and therefore it is free from the defects of material understanding. Material understanding is defective. If we hear something from a conditioned soul, it is full of defects. All material and mundane information is tainted by illusion, error, cheating, and imperfection of the senses. Because Vedic knowledge was imparted by the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental to material creation, it is perfect. If we receive that Vedic knowledge from Brahma in disciplic succession, then we receive perfect knowledge. Every word we hear has a meaning behind it. As soon as we hear the word water, there is a substance, water, behind the word. Similarly, as soon as we hear the word God, there is a meaning to it. If we receive that meaning and explanation of God from God himself, then that is perfect. But if we speculate about the meaning of God, it is imperfect. Bhagavad Gita, which is the science of God, is spoken by the personality of Godhead himself. This is perfect knowledge. Mental speculators, or so-called philosophers who are researching what is actually God, will never understand the nature of God. The science of God has to be understood in disciplic succession from Brahma, who was first instructed about knowledge of God by God himself. We can understand the knowledge of God by hearing Bhagavad Gita from a person authorized in the disciplic succession. When we speak of seeing, there must be form. By our sense perception, the beginning experience is the sky. Sky is the beginning of form, and from the sky, other forms emanate. Therefore, the objects of knowledge and sense perception begin from the sky. Text 34. Bhutanam chidritatritvam bahir antaram evacha pranendriyatma dishnyatvam nabhasa vritti lakshanam. The activities and characteristics of the ethereal element can be observed as the accommodation of room for the external and internal existences of all living entities, namely the field of activities of the vital air, the senses, and the mind. Purport. The mind, the senses, and the vital force, or living entity, have forms, although they are not visible to the naked eye. Form rests in subtle existence in the sky, and internally it is perceived as the veins within the body and the circulation of the vital air. Externally, there are invisible forms of sense objects. The production of the invisible sense objects is the external activity of the ethereal element, and the circulation of vital air and blood is its internal activity. That subtle forms exist in the ether has been proven by modern science by transmission of television, by which forms or photographs of one place are transmitted to another by the action of the ethereal element. That is very nicely explained here. This verse is the potential basis of great scientific research work, for it explains how subtle forms are generated from ethereal element, what their characteristics and actions are, and how the tangible elements, namely air, fire, water, earth, are manifested from the subtle form. Mental activities or psychological actions of that mental activities or psychological actions of thinking, feeling, and willing are also activities on the platform of ethereal existence. The statement in Bhagavad Gita that the mental situation at the time of death is the basis of the next birth is also corroborated in this verse. Mental existence transforms into tangible form as soon as there is an opportunity due to contamination or development of the gross elements from subtle form. Text 35. Nabhasa shabda tanmatrat kalagatya vikorvata sparsho bhavat tato vayus sparshasya cha sangraha. From ethereal existence, which evolves from sound, the next transformation takes place under the impulse of time, and thus the subtle element touch and thence the air and sense of touch become prominent. Purport. In the course of time, when the subtle forms are transformed into gross forms, they become objects of touch. The objects of touch and the tactile sense also develop after this evolution in time. Sound is the first sense object to exhibit material existence. And from the perception of sound, touch perception evolves. And from touch perception, the perception of sight. That is the way of the gradual evolution of our perceptive objects. Text 36. Mordutvam katinatvam cha saityam usnatvam eva cha etat sparshasya sparshatvam tanmatratvam nabhashvata. Softness and hardness and cold and heat are the distinguishing attributes of touch, which is characterized as the subtle form of air. Purport. Tangibility is the proof of form. In actuality, objects are perceived in two different ways. They are either soft or hard, cold or hot. This tangible action is the tactile sense. This tangible action of the tactile sense is the result of the evolution of air, which is produced from the sky. Text 37. Shalhanam yuhanam praptir netritvam dravya shabdayo sarvendrihanam atmatvam vayo karma bilakshanam. The action of the air is exhibited in movements, mixing, allowing approach to the objects of sound and other sense perceptions, and providing for the proper functioning of all other senses. Purport. We can perceive the action of the air when the branches of a tree move or when dry leaves on the ground collect together. Similarly, it's only by the action of the air that a body moves. And when the air circulation is impeded, many diseases result. Paralysis, nervous breakdowns, madness, and many other diseases are actually due to an insufficient circulation of air. In the Ayurvedic system, these diseases are treated on the basis of air circulation. If from the beginning one takes care of the processes of air circulation, such diseases cannot take place. From the Ayurveda as well as from Srimad Bhagavatam, it is clear that so many activities are going on internally and externally because of air alone. And as soon as there is some deficiency in the air circulation, these activities cannot take place. Here it is clearly stated, Dravya Shabdayo. Our sense of proprietorship over action is also due to the activity of the air. If the air circulation is stifled, we cannot approach a place after hearing. If someone calls us, we hear the sound because of the air circulation, and we approach that sound or the place from which the sound comes. It is clearly said in this verse that these are all the movements of the air. The ability to detect odors is also due to the action of the air. And thus ends our reading today. We'll continue from text 38 on Friday. Were there any comments or questions from the assembled devotees? No. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Gurudev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the worldwide devotees. Sama Bhakti Veda Vrinda Ki Jai. Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Nishangapali Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Ju Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai. Sham Kund Radha Kund Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Jai Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai. Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jai Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai. Krishna Bhakti Vedanta Institute Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. Jai Srimati Uma Devi Dasi Ki Jai. Jai Bhakta Anders Prabhu Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.
श्रीपाद कृष्ण केशव प्रभु जी की जय।
Dhanavad Pranams Didi.
धन्यवाद प्रणाम।